I'm Big Don Luka, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
Good day. We will be getting into the Mavericks' losses to the Memphis Grizzlies. We just covered the San Antonio Spurs game, but more so specifically in this one, yes, we'll be kind of glossing over the losses to the Grizzlies, but how significant they were in a sense of how season-defining they could potentially be. The Mavericks obviously kept their hopes alive with this recent Spurs game. And, you know, they're back up to 500 with the Lakers and Timberwolves lost. They move up to 8th in the Western Conference after being at 9th for a brief period of time the other night. But these Memphis Grizzlies games definitely put the Mavericks in a tough position. We're going to be looking a lot more big picture in this one, just looking at what could potentially ensue as the Mavericks do have 12 games left. Yes, that Spurs game did help a lot, but it was by no means a cure-all, especially with Kyrie and Luka potentially missing more games down the stretch. So we'll be getting into all of that. Of course, the Mavericks in that first game versus the Grizzlies had a clutch time loss that they suffered in a game where David Roddy, well, actually in both games, David Roddy just decided to evolve into almost younger Dylan Brooks, because Dylan Brooks now is like just this arrogant 4 for 13 shooting stat line every game who, you know, pretends to, you know, he plays good defense, and, you know, I think he just took a little bit too much stock into his offensive creation ability compared to when he was this sort of guy who could, you know, just do a little bit of playmaking and act as a 3-and-D player. And, you know, he even said in a recent interview that he wanted to be Draymond Green. But,
yeah, in 2016, I think.
Yeah, in 2016 when he was with or not a recent interview, but an interview a few years ago when he was with the Oregon Ducks, and now he is butting heads with Draymond, and there's that whole saga. He made like 2 threes after a bad shooting night in that latter game against the Mavericks, and he was blowing kisses to the crowd. So his head is very far up his ass, and I think he could be playing his role a little bit better, but that's more of a personal gripe more so than anything. Nonetheless, the Mavericks lost that first game 108 to 112 with some good play from David Roddy down the stretch. They lost that second game a lot more decisively and handily, where the Grizzlies beat them 104 to 88. So we will be getting into both of those two games and how they could affect the Mavericks as they, you know, go down the stretch of the season here. You know, the Mavericks have obviously having lost 9 out of their last 13 after that Spurs game. Just kind of in a huge state of disarray. You know, I know that Spurs game sort of remediated some of the woes, but it definitely didn't remediate any of the issues with this team as they continue to lose, you know, in these weird sort of just very debilitating ways time and time again. And I know Luka and Kyrie were out, you know, with their respective injuries, but we'll be getting into how that affects things, of course, too, just with how much time they may miss and how much the Mavericks can afford for them to recover. And just, you know, the call to action for the Mavericks role players to step up as we head down the stretch here, and, you know, maybe even divulge into a little bit of offseason talk, not necessarily what the Mavericks are going to do, but just what could ensue as we approach that time. Because, I mean, there's a chance the Mavericks don't make the playoffs despite sitting happy in the 8th seed at the moment. But before we do that, here's an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters. All right, Jaren. So getting into that first one, the Mavericks actually had some decent fight throughout that first game. It was not a game in which Tim Hardaway Jr. or Christian Wood were missing yet. And Tim Hardaway Jr. actually had a really good shooting performance. And the Mavericks, you know, they fought tooth and nail against a, you know, even though John Morant is currently not playing, he's actually slated to, he's not going to return against the Mavericks on Monday, but his 8-game suspension is over, and he is going to be steadfast in his recovery as he ramps up towards the playoffs per Adrian Wojnarowski and Shams Charania. So we obviously got all the reports about that today. So luckily he was not playing in both these two games, but unluckily for the Mavericks, they still lost them. So it doesn't really matter. And they very well could probably lose again on Monday night, even though he's probably not going to play. But I thought in this first game, they were able to ready the storm a little bit more. As we talked about in that other podcast in the Spurs game, I thought Josh Green and Jaden Hardy really typified that sort of stability factor with Luka and Kyrie out. I thought that this was honestly their best game together if we're looking at this sort of 3-game stretch so far that Luka and Kyrie has been out, where they Josh Green and Jaden Hardy for that matter just did a little bit better of a job in terms of their ability to run the offense. It didn't look as chaotic at times. The Mavericks definitely were looking for offense at times, and they only played Christian Wood 15 minutes in this one, which was sort of an odd play by Jason Kidd, as we kind of allude to that in that other podcast. But nonetheless, they, sort of just kind of went back and forth with the Grizzlies all game, had a really good third quarter. But in that fourth quarter, the Grizzlies really pushed the envelope in terms of their pace of play. Despite it not being necessarily the best Jaren Jackson Jr. game in either of these games, the Mavericks were getting pretty outworked on the glass. They had 43 rebounds in this one, contrary to the Grizzlies having 45, but the Grizzlies had 11. Well, I am kind of just basically redundant speaking right now, because the Mavericks had very similar rebounding numbers, but it often at times looked like Xavier Tillman was like really eating them up on the glass, and the Mavericks were just at a sincere size disadvantage in these two games with the Grizzlies. We're not talking about Dominic Barlow or, Sandro Mamukashvili. We're talking about, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Xavier Tillman, and they were able to put pressure on the rim. And, at the other side of things, in both of these games, they were, having started Xavier Tillman amidst the, sort of conglomerate of injuries that the Grizzlies have in their front court with Adams and Clark out. He's paying dividends. I mean, he's a bigger guy, but when he plays the 4 on defense, and you have basically the either best or second best rim protector in the league behind him, he's a very capable guy that can defend 4s and has good strength and lateral quickness. And that was giving the Mavericks some woes in this one. And Desmond Bane, his shooting and ability to get to the rim was definitely hurting the Mavericks in this one. It seemed as almost at a moment's notice, he was able to kind of blow by anybody he wanted. Tyus Jones didn't have the best game in this one, but nor did Dylan Brooks, of course, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning of the podcast. But the big guy who really went off, of course, and big, I mean like actually big physically as well, was David Roddy in that fourth quarter, just kind of filling in the gaps in whichever way required, whether it was running the floor in transition, guarding the Mavericks' best players time and time again. He did a really good job on Josh Green and Jaden Hardy in this one. Had a few steals and was able to get some transition buckets. Just served as a great outlet whenever there was any sort of drive and kick action for the Grizzlies. Made 4 out of his 7 threes, and he was getting some offense. He had like an offensive rebound, a few rebounds down the stretch where he was able to get shots back up. And I mean, he really just was able to sort of carry the tide over for the Grizzlies in that one. And the Mavericks just simply didn't have enough offensive firepower. But I mean, I honestly thought they didn't play too terribly defensively in this one. They did a good job of limiting Jaren Jackson Jr. You can kind of attribute it to him having just an off game as well, but it was definitely better than the second game, which I'll let you go over the second game, since I obviously kind of talked about the first game there. How did the Mavericks sort of fall short in that second one? Because it was a lot more decisively, and the Grizzlies definitely sort of planted their foot as a much more talented roster in that second game, even despite both of these teams missing their best players, with Ja out for the Grizzlies and Luka and Kyrie out for the Mavericks.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the first half, this one felt kind of similar. I didn't watch the first game, but this one felt similar to the first game in the sense that, it was kind of a back and forth battle throughout this one. I want to say it was like 51-50 going into halftime. And, this was, one where it definitely felt winnable for the Mavericks because, they definitely didn't put their best, offensive talent or, offensive production out on the floor, even though actually Tim Hardaway was playing. This is where he got hurt.
Tim Hardaway got hurt in this one. So he played 28 minutes, but he was kind of brittle down the stretch. And
yeah, exactly.
He definitely felt things were affecting him. And he ended up going out eventually. And Christian Wood did not play in this one. So they didn't have that outlet to go to in that Spurs game, as we just saw, like they did, obviously last night.
Yeah, of course. But as the game kind of waned on, this is where we saw really honestly, I mean, there's no better way to put it, but the talent distribution between the Grizzlies and Mavericks kind of wave on. Again, Christian Wood and Tim Hardaway Jr., who were probably the two most offensive producing guys, with Kyrie and Luka out. Of course, Jane Hardy and Josh Green picked up the pace a little bit throughout that game, but
yeah, this was probably Josh Green's best game amidst this stretch. Jaden Hardy, he had a rougher shooting game, of course, but I mean, he still definitely took the tie of the offense throughout big stretches in this game. He just couldn't really find his shot, and that's what really hurt the Mavericks.
No, that's exactly.
They just didn't have any offensive, production to be able to match the Grizzlies. And conversely, yes, the Grizzlies didn't, without Jaws at remediating factor to run their offense, you could definitely tell that they suffered a little bit. Especially, I don't think, Desmond Bane, for instance, in this one, he definitely kind of came back to earth a little bit. He's 7 for 13, but it just wasn't as dominant in that first one. Even David Roddy had a great game off the bench, but the Grizzlies, you can just see the sort of stark contrast between the Mavericks one-dimensionality of their role players versus the Grizzlies. I mean, I know I memed on Dylan Brooks in that first segment, but he had a decent game here. Like, they got like 3 guys that are, 3-and-D players, but they're also, able to attack off closeouts consistently and create their own offense in spurts when star players are out. And, it's not something that you can look to in a playoff stretch, but against some lackluster defense that the Mavericks play, like, they can actually do things like that. And David Roddy, Dylan Brooks, as well as Desmond Bane in this one, all just, really typified the, just non-one-dimensionality that the Grizzlies have versus the Mavericks, and their ability to, bring this home with their defense as well as their creation and, their ability to shoot. And I mean, they were making a lot of shots in this one. I think the Grizzlies ended up finishing 12 for 30. Oh, they finished 12 for 37 from 3, but they were getting a lot of shots up, and they just put a lot of pressure on the rim. And it wasn't even a terrible defensive game for the Mavericks. They kind of were benefactors of the Grizzlies not having Ja out there to run the stampede, because they just didn't get as much open looks. But on the other side of things, Mavericks just, couldn't find their footing offensively, outside of, Josh Green having a really good game, who I thought, for whatever reason, compared to this Spurs game that the Mavericks just played last night, looked a lot more in control in this one, offensively, and, with his ability to play make. But, without Christian Wood, without Tim Hardaway Jr., they just did not have enough offense to bring this one home.
Yeah, I think that's putting it lightly. Like, really just, I guess, the roster, management between Grizzlies was, put on a tee, and the roster mismanagement between the Mavericks just wasn't enough. I think that if you're looking at a big picture, that's probably the best excuse that you can make. Santi Aldama, David Roddy, like, these are all guys that this team drafted. And you look across the board at the Mavericks, Josh Green, Jaden Hardy, and I think that's honestly it between draft picks who played in this game. Was Maxey a draft pick? I can't remember.
No, he was undrafted.
Yeah, he was undrafted. Yeah. So if you're looking at it that way, like, half this roster in the Grizzlies,
they just have so much more young talent and young players that can produce compared to the Mavericks. Markieff Morris clocked some minutes in this one. Davis played 17 minutes. Justin Holiday had a pretty good game in this one. He knocked down a few threes, played good defense. But, you just see the stark contrast of capable young players who, are good to go all the time versus sort of, decently capable veterans, but also have, their holes at this stage in their career.
Yeah, just the one-dimensionality of the Mavericks. Like, yes, Luka makes everyone better around him, but he especially makes, fringe rotational players look like star rotational players. I think if you stuck, some of the guys that the Grizzlies are using as role players next to Luka, like, it would be completely different. But yeah, I just think, I know I'm trying to lean into the big picture for this, but there's 2 different, roster builds, and there's clearly one better standout, and it's whoever won that night, and that was clearly the Grizzlies. So
yeah. Also, on a lighter note, I kind of wanted to make fun of the fact that I remember in that first matchup where we went to that game early in the season versus the Grizzlies,
the home opener,
we memed on David Roddy like quite a bit for how big he was and how he couldn't defend Luka. But I mean, it's a tough ask for anybody to defend Luka. I mean, but his lateral quickness at his size was really put on a premium, and his ability to defend and cause havoc at the other end as well. So I did want to give a shout to him because, I mean, he combined for 41 points in 2 games. And I think that first game was a career high for him with 23. So he played a hell of a 2 games there. I don't know if he is going to be able to, play to that much of a premium in terms of his output, because I mean, it seems as if the Grizzlies just have like 3 of those just like, big bodied ass 3-and-D dudes who can also do a little bit of playmaking and shot creation with Brooks, Bane, and David Roddy. It just seems like that's just like 900 pounds bench pressed right there. But nonetheless, they got some really capable cogs as they in their rotation. And I know Brandon Clark's obviously out for the season. That's a tough blow, but if they can get Steven Adams back here down the stretch and get Ja back, if they're able to sort of shift the tide, they'll be really scary come playoff time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know a lot of people would call that, or like label them off as, just, being good at the right time. But that's a team that, given the talent back, and especially Steven Adams coming back and being healthy, like that's a team that, me personally, I think that they contend for a title. And they'll be stuck in that 2 to 3 spot.
If Ja can get his footing back before the playoffs.
Yeah, if he can, yeah.
Because I mean, as long as he just gets, a certain sample size, he should be decent. But and I know Brandon Clark's a big blow, and the whole torn Achilles, but I think Aldama sort of provides what Clark does in a different sense. I mean, he's a decent roller, but he's also a huge pick and pop threat, and they're fairly comparable defensively. So they just have a lot of depth. It's not like the Mavericks would even, like, if they had Brandon Clark in their rotation, they would not even have a guy to sort of back up that position. Like the Grizzlies, we talk about the Mavericks in terms of guards, wings, and centers. And I know that's the modern NBA sort of at a premium, of course, but the Grizzlies, like, they have so much depth that you have to like get intricate and be like, oh, who's playing this position? Xavier Tillman, he's more of a forward, or Aldama, you have Steven Adams. And I just wish we had that luxury. It makes me sad looking at these games. And that's why, we're not going to dial in on these games too much. We're going to look a little bit more big picture, before we get into the Jason Kidd discourse, which I'm sure is what, if anybody's listening to this podcast, which I don't presume a lot of you guys are, given that we just had the Spurs game, you're probably listening for us to go off on Jason Kidd, which will come here in a second. But nonetheless, I just want to get into the fact that obviously Luka, has this thigh contusion or whatever it is right now. Kyrie with the right foot soreness. It looked very grim the other day when the Mavericks were a game under 500. I was calling on Twitter for everybody to keep growing the beards until they got back over 500 or back to 500. So, I know Jaren is a very stylistic man, so he wouldn't shave regardless. But the Mavericks are finally, back at the midpoint of being at 500. But this was definitely the low point of the season. I don't even know, like, barring really the first few games of the season, if we've been under 500. Well, what have you got from just this recent, like, 15 games of the Mavericks, really since All-Star break? They've lost 9 of their last 13. The other day before this Spurs game, which we kind of denoted in that podcast. If you guys haven't listened to it, go check it out at mainstream Mavs on Twitter. If you guys want to go, you can find all our links to all our podcasts and stuff there. But if you want to listen to that, we kind of denoted that Spurs game as probably one of the more ugly losses of the season. And I definitely don't think that it was a sort of like cure-all for anything that happened in these 2 Grizzlies games. If these injuries persist with Kyrie and Luka, and, I do want to make sure they're healthy, because the way Luka was kind of laboring there, I'd rather them go healthy into the play-in, and it give the Mavericks a better chance than them go injury riddled, as the 6th or 5th seed or something like that. But as we move along down the stretch here, do you think the Mavericks are going to be able to first get out of the play-in? And second off, given these injuries to Kyrie and Luka, how much is that going to hamper them as they, go down with these last 12 games of the season here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that these are, legit questions to ask. I think in terms of all of the play-in teams at this current moment, I would probably put the Mavericks as the best team in that play-in spot. Now, not
Really,
saying
you
that
put the Mavericks as the best team in that playoffs in the play-in spot.
out of the 7 through 10. I mean,
Okay,
I'm
all
trying
right, go ahead.
Well, here, let me.
Yeah, I just wanted you to bring it up because I saw when
Yeah,
you start looking at the standings, there's
right
some
now.
cause for concern regarding the maybe
Yeah.
the Timberwolves or the Pelicans. I still think are in the playoff echelon because they're only a half game back out of 10th. And if Zion comes back, they could easily make a late season push. But so I don't know if I would say they're the best. I would probably go with the Pelicans if they get healthy, I guess. But otherwise, and then I guess it's very dependent on when Towns comes back for the Timberwolves. So they're one of the best, but they're still in a very scary position.
Like, look, I think the brightest future out of all of these 4 teams lies in Dallas, just because Kyrie.
I think we got to. I think we got to open it up to 6, Jaren. I think we got to open it up to.
Okay, well, if we're opening up,
because they're right there.
Yeah, but even still, I still think that's the best. Dallas is the best team.
You think they have the brightest future out of all 6 of those?
I'm not saying future. I'm just saying brightest to make it out of the play-in. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Or become a 7 or 8 seed. That's
fair
enough. Yes, the Timberwolves, they're kind of in the same boat that we're in, is where we're trying to rely on, injuries to come back, injury guys to come back, and that's Kyrie and Luka, of course. Same with the Lakers, same with the Pelicans. Basically every team in this play-in spot is kind of relying on some sort of injury player guy to come back.
Except the boys up in OKC and Bricktown.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna lie, they're kind of scary. I'm not gonna lie, but
yeah.
But needless to say, if you can get Kyrie back, if you can get Luka back, I don't care what playoff series you're in, you give yourself a chance just with that automatically. Now, hold back. I know you're probably saying something. But anyways, there's very grim discussion, and I'm trying to bring this back because I know the Spurs game and the Lakers loss and Timberwolves loss kind of shined a little bit of brightness into this very dark, grim room that we're in. But even still, it's very dark. I'm trying to just see what this team you have a situation where I'm getting very big picture here, but you have a situation where you have a top 5 player in the league and a top 25 player in the league. I don't get how you fuck this up, but they fuck it up time and time and time fucking again. So I hate to go off on a tangent there. Close your ears, little kids. But this is one where you shouldn't even be in this position, and yet they are. And yeah, I had to go off on a little tangent there, but yeah, I still think if you can give yourself a chance in the playoffs, with Luka and Kyrie on your roster, you can at least compete with the Grizzlies and at least compete with the Kings. Anybody else in that Western Conference standings, I really don't think can compete with.
Yeah, just given the obvious holes of this Mavericks team. And Jaren, would you like to highlight the holes that the Mavericks, because you noted them that they F this up? What are the holes of this team that they didn't address at the trade deadline after the Kyrie trade, where they kind of needed to make another move? They can still do it this offseason, but that's also banking on Kyrie re-signing and, his ever volatile happiness, which could definitely be conducive to how the Mavericks fare down the stretch. If he sees them and they don't even make the play-in or something like that, is this a situation he even wants to come back to? There's obviously a lot of questions that persist there. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on just what are the Mavericks' blatant holes right now that they obviously can't address really this season, not even with any buyout guys. That ship has kind of sailed there. It doesn't really even seem like they're going to do anything else in that department. What are their obvious holes that did not address at the trade deadline that caused you to say that they F this up, and how has that contributed to them losing games over this last recent stretch since the All-Star break?
These 2 recent games against the Grizzlies are honestly a really good, reason, or I guess a really good just, example of why this team is yet again, malpractice. It's because, you look at the Grizzlies roster, they have multiple guys off the bench for that matter that can do multiple different things. The Mavericks team, or this Mavericks team, is so one-dimensional that, at times, you almost cringe if you see Reggie Bullock dribble. Like there's times where you see, guys who don't dribble, probably, 1 out of every 5 games they get to dribble.
I mean, with even with like, especially with Maxey right now, like with the inhibitions on his athleticism, it makes him like extremely one-dimensional as well.
Exactly. And it's just like this, as one-dimensional as it gets in the NBA is basically the Dallas Mavericks. I think that if you're going to, and again, like there's really nothing you can do in this offseason. I know we're trying not to look like in the future or anything, or how to like.
I mean, there is. They have to make trades, and they had to use
they have to. They have to. Yeah, they have to make trades. But if you're going to solve the one-dimensional problem, like there's really nobody that you can pick up on the free agency block to solve that problem.
Yeah, free agency wise, unless Kyrie leaves, the Mavericks are definitely stuck in a sense. But also, given the, I know you talk about the dimensional aspect offensively, I do think that that's a big contributor, but I think the even larger issue here, of course, especially with Kyrie and Luka's inclusion, because you can kind of remediate some of those woes with your role players not, being relegated to just strict 3-and-D guys at times when you have those two on the floor. But I mean, if I had to diagnose the 3 biggest problems on the Mavericks team right now, first off, I would probably rank perimeter defense. Second off, I would probably rank interior defense. And then third off, I would probably rank the mismanagement of the Christian Wood situation. So yep. I think I would like you to go through all 3 of those points and sort of just diagnose your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, the perimeter defense, I think that pretty much speaks for itself.
And it's not as if the Mavericks, there are teams that have a lot better personnel in terms of their perimeter defense, but it's not as deal breaking as how bad the Mavericks, rim protection is. Their rim protection is a lot more limited personnel wise, but we've seen over these last few games that the perimeter defense has almost been worse than the rim protection at times. And I feel like some of that has to be just attributed to effort and how guys are competing on that end. Because I don't know, where it's just kind of a stark contrast compared to earlier in the season. We talked about it in that Spurs podcast where we saw Josh Green, guys like that, just being a lot more stout defensively. And I know Dorian left, and that's a huge deal in terms of the perimeter defense. That obviously matters a lot. Of course, him leaving in that trade, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem like they're getting enough juice out of, Josh Green, Reggie Bullock, McKinley Wright, and Justin Holiday. He plays decent when he's in there, but he doesn't get enough minutes. Like Maxey's not as he's a little bit more slow-footed after the injury. I don't know. I just think that Luka, especially as injury riddled as he was before he was officially announced out, his defense was terrible. I mean, Kyrie is probably one of the better defenders on the team. It just seems as if there's almost rotational effort, issues at times. Like there seems as if there's a lot of team issues that persist there. Like guys aren't helping when they're supposed to. They're not making the right switches. Like it almost just barring just the personnel, which I would probably say is average. If you run across the NBA and look at other teams' perimeter defense, this team just doesn't have that synchronization of their team defense that they had last year that led them to that top 5 defense in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at the perimeter defense, to me, it's more of a team aspect. I'm not looking at an individual aspect. I think Josh Green, I think Reggie Bullock, Justin Holiday, those are all feasible defenders. Those are all guys that you can rely on the defensive side of things. But even still as a team, they're still, finishing, almost last in every matchup that they're having to play against on that side of things. I think that just sort of speaks to, I don't want to say coaching just to, sort of rub salt in the wound, but I think at the end of the day, it kind of falls, at least some of it. A little bit on
kid, just to get the guys, ready and up to the par, of
exactly.
Course, and just to get the team defense more synchronized, but it also does lie on the players, of course, to carry that burden as well.
Yeah, exactly. And oftentimes whenever we see a bad perimeter defense, we'll see a bad interior defense.
Because they get put in bad positions by virtue.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to make.
You're already working with very limited personnel,
especially with Maxey just coming back from injury.
Yeah, exactly. He's already having to, carry the burden of having to be that switchable guy who, I mean, that's a luxury to have, but he's already having to defend the perimeter as well as defend the interior on multiple possession, or on the same possession throughout multiple times in the game. And that's just a burden. Or with better personnel, of course, you wouldn't have to necessarily do that, but with him coming off injury, that's just a very tough ask, and we've seen it kind of culminate and start to eat up at him as he gets later in games here. But yeah, I mean, I think that's as far as the perimeter defense goes, it's not as personnel based. The rim protection, I think, is a lot more personnel based. I just want to get your thoughts on that and the just sort of big man rotation. When the Mavericks do play those two big man lineups, does the rim protection look better? Depending on, if it's Wood Maxey or Wood and Powell or just a lone big out there. And should JaVale play more? Do they even have the wherewithal to have good rim protection this year? Like, what are your overarching thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm going to say it here. I just don't really think that this team has the ability to even, sniff a top 15 in terms of interior defense. I just don't think that they have the personnel to do so. Even if you play JaVale McGee in the most prime positioned role, one where we saw or where we thought we would see him at the beginning of the season.
So you're saying if we got JaVale, like Phoenix Suns JaVale,
it would definitely improve, but I still don't think that
maybe you could get to average then.
Yeah. But with the personnel,
he couldn't play enough minutes to.
Exactly. Yeah. But with the personnel that we're given, an injury riddled Maxi Kleber, Dwight Powell, we know what his depletions are and what his holes are on defense. Christian Wood, I mean, kid refuses to play him. And JaVale McGee, again, you can't play him.
And I mean, Christian Wood, it's like we've talked about his defense ad nauseum. It's like he's good as a freelancer. He has the ability to switch onto some, not the opposing team's best perimeter point of attack guys. But at the same time, I mean, he's still, not. He's definitely not, a top 15 rim protector in the league or anything like that. He's okay as the lone big, I guess, kind of depending on the game, of course. But he's best optimized in those 2-man lineups. But if it's with Powell, you're just going to concede a lot at the rim just with Powell there. And if it's with Maxey, you're relying on, how much has Maxey's hamstring recovered, and it just kind of is a game-to-game thing. And I mean, I would still rank Maxey as the Mavericks' best big man defender. If I had to go number 2, I'd probably roll with Wood. Just based on the last few games. If you would have asked me a week ago, I probably would have said Powell because his team defense was better and Wood's individual defense was a little bit worse, but he's kind of upping the ante as we go down the stretch here. But I mean, those two are kind of neck and neck from that aspect. And then, what JaVale's done this year, I'd have to put him last, but it's just, a tough ask personnel guys to expect all of those guys to, really come in and fortify the back end night in and night out.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's putting it lightly. Like, I think we pretty much nailed the head on that. What was your third thing?
The mismanagement of the Christian Wood situation.
Yeah. That's just something that, a distraction that you really don't need. I can't remember the last time that we saw, such a disgruntled I guess disgruntled is the best way.
Probably Nerlens.
Yeah, like Nerlens Noel, I think is the last time we saw this, but even still, like Nerlens Noel was nowhere near this talent. Christian Wood can give you.
I think Nerlens definitely had potential in a different way. I mean, obviously as a rim protector, he was a lot more skilled, and he's probably a better rim runner as well. Maybe even a better rebounder. I don't know. I probably not. He's probably.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know about rebounding, but
yeah, but I mean, the Nerlens situation is just a stark contrast though, because he wasn't getting played because of him taking the qualifying offer, and the Mavericks offered him like a 4-year, $70 million deal, and the whole situation with his agent, him refusing that was just a mismanagement on his part. The Mavericks have mismanaged Christian Wood on their part.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I guess you put it in a good way. Yeah. Like this is, from a franchise, a failure. And doing it.
You traded for this guy.
Yeah, exactly. You traded for him. This was one where you advertised as, going into the season, it was going to be this crazy duo between him and Luka. And, we all knew that it would need some work, but we just haven't seen anything near that. At glimpses, we've seen, them work off each other, whatever. But even still, like from a franchise perspective, like you're doing this guy a disservice. It's a contract year for him. I understand if you're, trying to get the best value out of him, but this is pretty much choking this guy's career just to get make his contract 10 million less a year. Like I understand
it. With some of the rumors out there, we don't want to be too accusatory.
Okay, but it seems like the most logistical sort of aspect that I've heard is that they're kind of seating him down and grooming him for, I guess you can call it a worser contract. Which
it's just not optimizing your team or the amount of wins or anything. And
especially for this year,
if that is the case, that is a very cheap tactic by the front office and all the players involved there are Jason Kidd, Nico Harrison, Mark Cuban. But other than that, we talked a lot in the Spurs podcast kind of post game just about, the sort of, because I know that there's still a lot of, competing interest in terms of, what is the optimal rotation of the Mavericks big men. And you guys can go listen to the Spurs podcast for that. I'm a little bit more differential to Christian Wood than some out there, but I can still see the gripes of the other side. But I think we can all agree, like bottom line, that he should still at least get more than 10 to 15 minutes a game. If he shouldn't, and if the Mavericks think that he shouldn't, then this is not a caliber of player that they should have traded for last June, or even if it was a late first round pick, give up a first round pick for.
Yeah, I would have to agree with basically everything you said. Just from a franchise perspective, like especially this year, there's no guarantee for next year. There's no guarantee that Kyrie's coming back. Like I think the smartest option would be optimizing your team's ability ad nauseum this year, but it seems like they're putting that on hold. And they'd rather, risk a future asset or even the future as a whole for this franchise just to sit him down. And, like I said,
the point that you made is very logical because, like, if it was just a value play and they really didn't like his fit, like they would have probably tried to attempt to trade him at the deadline heavier, or maybe there was just no market for him. I don't know, but you're just doing him a disservice by if this is, your real thoughts and feelings on him. Should trade him at the deadline. And we'll see how it goes as the season sort of trouches along here. But right now the situation is definitely a chaotic bad in Dallas in terms of the mismanagement of the Christian Wood situation. But other than that, Jaren, do you have any other remaining thoughts on how the franchise has mismanaged Christian Wood's playing time and, bringing him in after, in June last year at the time of the draft?
Other than honestly kind of looking like this franchise honestly turned themselves, it looks like they're trying to look for a scapegoat as if this isn't our fault, but they're kind of turning it into a fault that's only their own. I guess that's the best way to put it. But that,
even if the story that you or the sort of logical explanation for why Christian Wood may not be receiving minutes, even if that's what the Mavericks are going for, it just runs the risk of him obviously not being happy. And I know there's not a lot of suitors in free agency, but anybody can create cap space. And he may not be the most highly touted guy in the market, especially with his defensive limitations. But I'm sure if the situation is as bad as it seems, he's liked a few Instagram posts and things of that nature, sort of connotating that he's been mistreated by the Mavericks staff just in terms of, how they've operated with his playing time and things of that nature. That guy would definitely see the door at a moment's notice, even if it maybe meant that he, wasn't getting as much money as he potentially could. This whole situation is just screwed up, and the Mavericks are doing a disservice to all the players involved by virtue of it. Even, you can be in the anti-Wood camp or the Wood camp in terms of his fit with the team and how you view it. But at the end of the day, you can't deny that it's been malpracticed by the Mavericks front office in terms of how they manage the situation. But barring that, I guess we'll go ahead and get into the Jason Kidd stuff. I guess we won't go like quote for quote because there's just been kind of too many quotes that have sort of came out over the last week or so with some of these tough losses that the Mavericks have lost 9 out of their last 13, but there's just been a sort of general sense of apathy, at least to the media. I don't know how he operates with his team, but there's been a general sense of apathy and lack of sense of urgency from Jason Kidd with a lot of these quotes. And if he's kind of just a keen observer like the rest of us, and he's letting his team just go out there and do whatever, and as if he just has no control over the situation. What do you go to think about Jason Kidd's sort of lack of accountability amidst these last couple of weeks, at least in terms of his post-game comments?
Yeah, I mean, I hope what he says is only, sort of picking and joking. I hope that's what it is, because it seems like he finds humor in it. Which, I mean, if so, good for you, go ahead, but we're not seeing the results. Like if we were seeing results and he was doing this, it'd be a different discussion. But outside of that, I mean, this is a guy, we've seen his struggles through history in like year 2, because everyone says just wait for year two year 2 Jason Kidd. It kind of seems like we're getting a full circle moment right now. And I mean, I don't know how you would surmise it, but I would say in one word, it's very immature, I guess. It's just not, as a leader of a team, as a coach of a team, you expect to take accountability of things that may not even be your fault. Just at a professional level, you try and be professional. We haven't really even seen professionalism put on a tee, at least for this last few weeks, in this recent really bad stretch of Dallas Maverick basketball. But just on the court, sort of like my gripe, I think that this team just as a whole, I know in the Spurs game I mentioned the offense not having an identity with Luka and Kyrie out, but just as a whole, like this team really doesn't have an identity outside of Luka. I don't think
it seems as if the rotation fluctuates a lot, and Kidd has not found a stable rotation to go to. Exactly. I get that he's not, like I've said this a lot of times, he's not dealing with the best playing cards here, but at the same time, it just doesn't seem as if there's been one point in this season where he's truly optimized the rotation. Maybe it's because we're just being Twitter coaches, as he has denoted us, and all that sort of stuff. But I think at the end of the day, it's just really odd that he, just hasn't found a stable rotation amidst this many games into the season, or at least one that works like fairly consistently. It almost seems as if the Mavericks are having to go to different lineups throughout different stretches, different amounts of times. And just the inconsistency of a lot of guys' spots on this team and the weirdness of some of the decisions he makes is just very erratic, and at times can be very erroneous for the Mavericks. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that from an on-court perspective, how he has operated really throughout these 70 games of this season, of course, because, I don't think like there's ever been a sort of mismanagement with how he's used Kyrie and Luka or anything like that, or any like thing big with any of the star players. But in terms of the role players, it just seems as if their roles fluctuate quite a bit on this team. And and there's just been no sort of sense of ability and sort of sense of stability. And through 70 games, I mean, obviously we talked about the Christian Wood situation. He's the most mismanaged, but even guys like Josh Green at times have had their spot revoked just because they got hurt for like a game or two, incorporating Maxey, Dwight Powell just being DNP CD'd at the beginning of the season. Now is a seamless part of the rotation. I mean, I don't know who exactly that falls on. Justin Holiday being placed in a bigger role. Should we see more Markieff Morris minutes? It's like Jason Kidd tries all this different stuff out, yet we don't even see him try out some of the things that we would, earnestly hope for him to try. And, maybe we don't have all the solutions at our hand either. Maybe, we don't know as much as an NBA head coach, but at the same time, the results speak for themselves. And regardless of if we know more or if he knows more, at the end of the day, he has not optimized the rotation clearly throughout the first 70 games, or else the Mavericks would have probably at least marginally better results right now.
Yeah, I mean, for a team that made the Western Conference Finals last year and made, an amazing push at a championship run last year. To have 12 games left in the season and there to be so many different questions, I mean, it's really discouraging. It's really alarming. There seems to be zero alarming or zero concern in the books of the head coach in Dallas, but nonetheless, I mean, we're stuck in this situation. It seems like through the next 12 games, he's denoted the starting, or he's denoted the regular season as sort of a dress rehearsal. And, whenever we come into the playoffs, we'll see the actual, numbers, and we'll see the actual lineups that work so well be put on the court. But my question is, you're sitting at 35 and 35 right now, 12 games left.
May not even make the play-in.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a chance you don't make the play-in. Like, you're sitting 1.5 games back, or I think a game and a half back of the 11th spot, where again, you're not going to make the playoffs, or even give your team a chance to make the playoffs. But I figured there'd be a little desperate sort of spark in this team, and yet again, especially in the Memphis games and even that San Antonio game last night, like, I don't feel like we've seen a sense of urgency through this team. I don't know if that's them feeling that good about themselves that they're going to make the playoffs. They're not going to have this late season push that they've had to, I guess, be put themselves in. I don't know if they feel that confident or whatever it is, but there needs to be a sense of urgency. 12 games isn't a whole lot in a sample size. Yes, these next 12 games are the most important. But for a 12-game stretch, that if you want a guaranteed lock, you pretty much have to go, I don't know, 10-2, I would say, to give yourself a good seeding and a lock at home court
Out
advantage.
of the play-in, yeah.
And especially out of the play-in, yeah. You need to go an incredible stretch, and I don't know, I just don't see that on the horizon of the team like that.
Yeah, and I mean, just in terms of some of like the on-court logistics, like we just kind of scratched the surface of like the main problems, but I mean, just some of the late game situations where he's mismanaged the play calling there, as well as the defensive schematics not being comparable to what they were last year, with a very similar roster outside of Dorian Finney-Smith. And, you insert Josh Green, who's obviously playing that role a little bit more. So it's just odd from that perspective. And it's definitely been a downswing from the Jason Kidd fan club on my end, at least. But where are you at in terms of your standing with how much you like him on this team? Do you think that this season is going to serve as a litmus test to, how much longer he's got with the Mavericks? Do you think that, say, the Mavericks go to the first round of the playoffs, that he saves himself? Like, how much job security does he have right now, essentially?
I mean, I feel like there has to be some serious concern, not concern, but I feel like there has to be some serious discussion at the end of the season, whether or not they make the playoffs or even win a playoff series for that matter. I still think that there needs to be some discussion. I think, as savvy as a business person that Cuban is, I feel like you want someone representing your team well and someone who represents your team as a professional. And again, I mean, it's just not a good image to have, someone that doesn't care. And not saying that kid doesn't care, but just through his post-game comments, it kind of gives off that sort of like, it's just that he's not the most caring guy.
As apathetic as he is towards the media, we obviously don't know if he operates that towards his team, but it's just a bad look. So, and I mean, there's obviously been some different on-court logistics and intricacies that we have gripes about. But I mean, mainly the rotations in terms of the on-court stuff. So we'll have to see how that situation evolves, of course, over the coming weeks and months. And of course, how the Mavericks finish this regular season is going to be extremely conducive to that. I don't think that there's any sort of call to his job yet, but I mean, if I was running the team, if I was the owner, I would have concerns, but I just don't know if the Mavericks themselves are there yet. I think that they're going to write out his legacy and all that sort of stuff, and probably don't want to fire him from the backlash. It would come off too hard. I don't know. I think that they'll end up writing it out unless things, unless the Mavericks lose the next 12 games of the season or something just absurd. I would still think that and presume that he's probably the coach come training camp next season, regardless of what happens. But I mean, how much more can you take? I don't know. We'll see how much the Western Conference Finals run last year was a saving grace for him. But nonetheless, if I had my my pick of the lottery, essentially, I would definitely offer some other head coaches in this league. But, this is the situation that we're dealing with. So it is what it is. Other than that, amidst all this with the Mavericks losing, and, we've kind of basically talked about all the reasons that they've went on this rough stretch, this all-star break, and they've been, they've lost 9 out of their last 13, all that sort of stuff. There's been some calls from fans, with the Mavericks top 10 pick owed to the New York Knicks in 2023 for the Mavericks to potentially tank. Me personally, I don't think the Mavericks should intentionally tank, but if it ends up sorting out that way and, they either make one of those 9th or 10th seeds in the play-in and miss it, or I don't know exactly how that works with lottery ratings or anything like that. But I mean, if they're in the draft lottery and they have a shot, then, I hope for the best. I just think that with Luka and Kyrie on your team, it's just too, bad of an image to those guys to, send that sort of message, especially in a contract year for Kyrie, to tank this late in the season and, just sell the ship. And I don't think they'll do that. But I mean, the longer that these injuries evolve over the next, coming days and weeks, we may find out if they're actually tanking or not. What do you think of the whole discourse around it? What do you think is the most optimal scenario for the Mavericks? And do you think they should tank?
I think if you're looking at it from a future perspective, if there's a 100% guarantee that you'll either, be given your top 10 pick or
listen, so the draft lottery is obviously 14 teams.
Yeah.
And, it's obviously all odds based. There's no certainties, but, I like that. That's a decent way to put it. Like, if the Mavericks, I don't know if I necessarily would agree that I would want them to tank in any aspect, but, if they're going to, then, start piling up the wins, the losses now, because, that sort of jockeying within those seating positions and things of that nature is huge. Like, if the Mavericks had the 10th best odds compared to the 14th best odds, the odds that they would keep their pick would be insurmountable compared to, if they just had the 14th best odds in the draft lottery, they probably would not still concede it to New York.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think, at the end of the day, if you aren't giving yourself a chance at having that top 10 pick, you're giving New York a chance at getting a better player. I know that, we don't play New York other than 2 times a year, but still, you don't want a team getting better. Outside of that, I think if you, have a shot at the playoffs, which they clearly do, you have to go at it. But again, as you said, if these injuries keep persisting and these injuries become more and more serious and more of a problem, I say, why not just deactivate, Kyrie.
If the injuries are, season-wide issue and they just can't get them healthy, then, I mean, at that point, I'd be all in.
Yeah. And like, look, I don't mean to be this way, but from a future building and from a roster building perspective,
it would probably be the best
right guy on draft
if you could keep Kyrie.
Yeah, and you can keep Kyrie. Yes,
he wouldn't get too disgruntled at the fact that the Mavericks. But I mean, if he was sitting out at the end, I don't know how much he would care specifically, but it's a really sticky situation to be in. Lastly, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the Kyrie, Luka injuries themselves. Not necessarily, like future forecasting them, but is there any sort of like mark you think that if they only come back with this many games left, or if the injuries are this bad, then the Mavericks just simply won't be able to, not just like recover to make the play-in or playoffs, but if they do make the play-in or playoffs, they just won't get enough, they won't get enough of a ramp up to even like have any sort of fight in the play-in or the first round of the playoffs. Like, what is your mark that you would say the season is kind of lost at that point, even if Luka and Kyrie come back?
I'm going to say for Luka, I think as long as Luka comes back 100% healthy, you can give yourself a chance at anything. For Kyrie, right foot suit or like this soreness, whatever it is, like I know it's more of just a play, or at least it seems like it's more of just a play to, sit him down for a little bit.
I mean, I don't know. It seems like he genuinely has some soreness.
Like, I'm not saying.
It didn't seem like it was an actual.
Like, I don't think
I don't know if they're actually tanking, but some of the injury reports obviously have been semi-sketch.
Yeah, I don't think that this is an injury that should sideline you for 3 games. That's my question or my gripe, whatever you want to call it.
At the same time, in a contract year, like
you want to be as healthy as
he doesn't
possible.
want to run the risk of getting hurt.
Exactly.
And I mean, I do agree that I'd rather them, like I said, be like the 10th seed in the play-in and have to climb their way up and be fully healthy going into a first round series versus, having that home court advantage, or not, they wouldn't even get that. But if they were like the 6th seed, for instance, and avoid the play-in somehow, but it came at the risk of Kyrie or Luka getting re-hurt. I mean, I just don't think it's worth it. Like, we're not in the playoffs yet, so I just don't know. I'd rather the guys be healthy, especially knowing that the Mavericks probably won't push for a title this year.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree. For Luka, I think, whenever he feels 100% is whenever he should come back. Because I'm going to be quite frank, I just don't think he's been 100% probably since before the All-Star break. And for Kyrie, same kind of deal. If he's not 100%, I think for Friday or for Kyrie, like, I think Friday's a good sort of cutoff line. If he misses any more games than this Laker game,
I would probably say the Grizzlies game.
Yeah, Friday or Monday. I don't know. It would just be kind of a little sus, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know
if he misses, probably more in that Memphis game. I would definitely start to, but at the same time, we're not in these guys' bodies. We don't know exactly how they're feeling to give credence to their points. So it's a real just weird situation. But our sort of brief summation is we're not calling for the Mavericks to tank. We want them to go as far as they can with this roster, even if we know that it's not going to lead to contention, because we recognize the importance, especially when you have 2 superstars on your team, that you have to try to win. But at the same time, if they are put in that position, for whether just because of injuries or whether they just can't ramp it up enough with these 2 guys and they come back too late in the regular season, or they just bear some unfortunate luck come playoff time, I mean, by all means, this is a loaded draft class, man. Let's see what we can find in the top 10. So, but I mean, otherwise, like you said at the beginning, that Memphis and the Kings may be the only teams where we even stand a chance in the playoffs. I mean, even then, like, you're looking at some tough matchups where the Mavericks are probably severely overmatched. But, with Kyrie and Luka back, anything can happen. But I think that just how this season has ended up, it's pretty clear that the Mavericks holes are I think they're too prominent and they're too unavoidable for them to have any sort of Cinderella run. It wasn't like, I just don't get it wasn't like last year where they were steaming hot going into the playoffs. Like, the Mavericks cap at this point, in my opinion, is a first round victory. And that's only if they're able to catch a very young Kings team off guard, and just because it's their first playoff series and God knows how long they end up kind of just falling apart, or if the Grizzlies aren't able to ramp up with Ja in time. But I mean, we're having to rely on like outside factors here. Like, if we're just taking any of them, if the Mavericks, if we're taking them straight up against any of these teams, we'd probably say that they would lose. Would you? I mean, in terms of first round matchups, because they'd be going against anybody probably in the top 4 seeds in that first round.
Yeah, anybody in the top 4 seed right now in this current
just from a talent perspective would beat the Mavericks.
Yeah, from a talent perspective, I don't think that they can compete in a 7-game series. Now, the reason why I bring up Memphis and the reason why I bring up Sacramento is just because, like, from a talent, like top talent perspective, like Luka and Kyrie can beat. I think the only teams that they can't beat are probably Golden State and Denver. Like, I think those are, if you're looking at
but over 7 games, it's a lot harder with the defensive issues that persist on this team. But I would say, though, just because of how young the Kings are, that there could be some volatility there. In the Grizzlies situation with Ja right now is kind of screwed up, even though he is on the horizon to return. So we'll have to see how that situation kind of unfolds. But nonetheless, very much a grim, darker podcast. But, this is kind of what has been warranted just by the state of the team over the last, just ever since the All-Star break, ever since the Kyrie trade. Let's hope things turn the tide for the best, if that's getting a top 10 pick, or if that is making some sort of run the playoffs to go with a little bit of momentum into this offseason as we enter Kyrie free agency saga. But nonetheless, it is a bad state of affairs over here at the Mainstream Mavs podcast, but we will be with you guys here through thick and thin, and through the bad days and the even worse days and the great days, because We don't fold. We're not bandwagoners. But other than that, we will catch you guys in the next one. Make sure to check out our podcast that we released over the Spurs game. If you haven't done so already, there was some very good discourse regarding that game and how it unfolded. Whole Maxi Kleber situation at the end, but the Mavericks also pulling out in overtime. Christian Wood finally getting his minutes ramped up a little bit. Go check that out. You can follow us on Twitter at mainstream_Mavs. You can subscribe to us and like and comment our video. If you're listening on YouTube, shout out to the YouTube gang. Comment. Will Kyrie Irving play Friday versus the Lakers? And if you guys are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure to give us a follow or a subscription, whatever, I guess it warrants on whatever platform. Give us a 5-star rating if you feel so inclined, and speak your mind. If you hate Jaren's just egotisticalness and how much he's rizzed up with his hairstyle, or you hate me wearing this robe because it's too cold in my house, let us know. But other than that, we will catch you guys in the next one. Mainstream Mavs signing out.
Bye. Bye.